Hello and welcome back to Galverton Parkway. You join me today for another Meet the Fleet episode. Now this episode is going to follow on from where the previous episode left off. My previous episode highlighted the locomotives that were fitted with sound. Now this episode is going to feature one locomotive, and it's the latest locomotive to be fitted with sound, and that's the loco that you see in front of you. This locomotive is a Heljan Class 33 presented in EWS livery, running number 33030. Now this locomotive has recently been fitted with a Lego Man Biffo sound, and I fitted a speaker in the fuel tanks. The fuel tanks themselves have been specially made by DC Kits, and they are accommodating a speaker underneath. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail when we have a look at the loco up close, but firstly I will just quickly show you around the loco itself. So the locomotive, as you'll see, it's been weathered. It's been quite lightly weathered, nothing too much, just with my usual airbrush techniques. To be fair, you'll probably see the weathering a little bit better when we move the camera over to the layout and have a little running shot of the locomotive. Now I mentioned that the locomotive had a speaker fitted in the fuel tanks, and I mentioned that the fuel tanks were custom fuel tanks. These fuel tanks, as previously explained, were bought from DC Kits. They came ready designed to fit this speaker in, so I purchased them as a package, the fuel tanks and the speaker, and they came in about £20. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can purchase this if you want to. Now with Class 33, there's not a lot of room in inside the actual locomotive to fit a sound chip and a speaker if you wanted to. So when we go, if you have a look at that, you're not going to fit a decent sized speaker in there anywhere, so it leaves you a little option but to put one in the tanks underneath. So the tanks underneath, they were fairly simple to fit. There are two sets of lugs which the normal Heljan fuel tanks clip into underneath the locomotive. However, these don't actually have those lugs on them. You have to glue the tanks directly to the bottom. Now the lugs for the previous fuel tanks have two holes in the bottom of the chassis. I utilised those holes in the chassis to run the wires up to the decoder from the speaker. It was semi-time consuming, I would say. I had to do a little bit of work to the inside of the fuel tanks just to file them down to get them sorted out. Now, as I mentioned, the sound file in this locomotive, it's a V4.0 lock sound decoder loaded with Lego Man Biffo's latest sounds. Now, this decoder I had reblown for me by Richard at Roads and Rails, who I use for most of my speakers. I'd recommend, if you have any decoders that you need reblowing, get them sent off to Richard. Excellent service, really quickly turned around and sent back to me via first class post. Really competitive price as well, so I'll be using Richard for all of my reblows going forward if I need any done. So what we'll do now, we'll take the locomotive, we'll get her on the track, start her up, take her through the sequence of sound, and you can have a listen to it. So we're over at the layout now, and I've got the locomotive set up here ready for you to have a look at and listen to some of the sounds. You can, as I thought, see the weathering a little bit better now that the locomotive is actually on the track. You'll also notice that I've detailed one end of the locomotive. I tend with all of my locomotives to detail one end and retain the tension lock coupling at the other end to allow me to actually pull some stock. Now this locomotive will be primarily used for light engineering trains and on a inspection saloon. So there we go. What I'll do now, I'm going to start the locomotive up for you. You can have a listen to it. So function 0, obviously you've got your lights. Now what I'll do with this, as this is one of Lego Man Biffo's latest sound files, you can actually use the drive lock feature. So basically that will allow me to press function 8 on this decoder, and it will hold the locomotive still, and it will allow me to accelerate through the full range of notches on the throttle. Basically the idea behind that is you can imitate heavy loads, etc. You can run at a fairly slow speed and really open up the locomotive without it increasing too rapidly. That's the purpose of it, but for the purposes of this I'll just hold it still and take you through some of the sounds. So I'm going to stop waffling now, I'll turn this on, you can have a listen. So there we are. I took it up from a idle right to a full throttle open, all the way back down to an idle, and then shut it down again. Quite happy with the way that sounds. So I'll probably now just put a couple of shots of it actually running, so that you can apply a bit more context to the sounds that you're hearing. But I thought it made sense to show you that as it is, so you could get the full range of sounds.